Raleigh, you might pick up some of what you've been arguing for in multi-generational or intergenerational youth ministry as an iteration of the well-known saying, it takes a village to raise a child. But part of what you wanted to emphasize today is in that village, folks have very different roles. Mm-hmm. And it's important for us to understand how those roles are similar and how they're distinct and how we discern who's suitable for one role or another. Can you talk a little bit about the different ways in which we look for different aspects of leadership in youth ministry?
Most certainly. The notion of it takes a village gets at the intergenerational nature of this. But it also gets at the village has differing people in those generations doing differing critical leadership roles. You have the elder who takes a particular role in regard to governing, or you have a young person who takes a particular role in terms of investigation. You have parents taking particular roles in terms of guidance and so on. Let's for a moment imagine that the village is the people of God and the local expression of the people of God on the ground in a congregation with all its strengths and all of its warts. If one thinks about congregations, one regularly thinks about pastor. Well, most often, pastors and young people grow apart over the years. The education of a pastor, the age of a pastor, the roles of a pastor around marrying and burying and so forth aren't necessarily naturally the roles that bring one into the life of a young person. However, we've discovered that pastors are the single most critical player in the life of the congregation. First of all, simply in the way in which they come up inside of faith itself. Is it something they do as a profession only? Is it something that they do as their job? Or are they real? Do they have a backside? Do they err? Do they sin? Do they ask for forgiveness? Do they have a sense of humor? How is it that God is truly at work in their life? And so the living, if you will, authentic faith of the pastor makes a huge difference because the pastor has huge symbolic role in the life of the congregation. The interest of the pastor in developing relationships with kids, noticing, listening, in sermons, knowing enough about a young person's life to use examples whereby the kid looks at his friend or her friend and says, he gets it. So the power of the person who's in the role of symbol bearing and preaching is critical. But also the power of that person to say to the congregation, kids are going to count here. And to be on the lookout in the vestry or the boards of the church, to be a spokesperson in the worship of the church. So for the pastor to get how this is done and to be really blatantly selfish, one of the ways and one of the reasons why we wrote, John Roberto, Wes Black, and I, The Spirit and Culture of Youth Ministry is exactly for pastors, for them to read and get a concept of how this can be done. But then you have all kinds of other people who can be a part of the team or in the village. To have in the smallest congregation to the largest congregation, one person who really is passionate about kids and loves them and goes to bed at night worrying about kids. The point person. In 3/4 of the congregations we studied, this person was present but wasn't paid. They were a volunteer, but they were publicly announced and known in the congregation as this person. Usually then around them were people, companions who were helping them in the process. And regularly these were persons across 3 generations, sometimes young adults, sometimes parental types, sometimes grandparent types. These were people who brought their gifts to bear, like the snowmobile aficionado in northern Minnesota who ran a youth group snowmobile club. And they had a retreat every year, a snow retreat every year, where he'd bring his snowmobile club, and they would, in fact, be at the center of the youth ministry. Kids themselves, as young people move in the influence of the congregation from outliers to people who make, if you will, informal contract commitments to being involved, to actual commitments and contracts to be responsible for certain leadership roles in the congregation, to coming to the center of the congregation itself and participating in the search and the decision-making of the congregation, they have a chance to practice leadership. And their leadership, in many ways, is not only critical to the lives of other kids, but becomes also essentially facilitative of the life of the congregation. And finally, for parents to be leaders. Very often for a congregation to reach out and strengthen the domestic church, that is the place where people live and die and pray and work out relationships, it takes an interpretation process. It takes parents learning that this is possible, of reimagining family as a place for faith to be practiced. And regularly, that's done via 2 or 3 parents who get it, who understand what it is, are practicing it, and can interpret that within the life of families. So we're thinking about a village of roles, a village of leaders here, where we've got the pastor playing a key role, a point person in youth ministry playing a key role, a supporting cast, kids in leadership, and parents. So it doesn't have to rest on one person's shoulders. And it's most certainly not all paid for.